May 28, 1940. Reich Air Ministry, Berlin. Reich Marshal Hermann Göring placed the intelligence file on his desk with open disdain. The report outlined President Franklin Roosevelt's appeal to Congress for an extraordinary expansion of America's aircraft industry, a goal of building 50,000 planes each year. "The Americans are grasping at illusions if they think such boasting will frighten us," Göring sneered to his staff. "They understand nothing of true war production. Let them try turning their car factories into aircraft plants. They will soon discover that assembling warplanes takes far more than conveyor belts." What Göring did not realize was that in Detroit, a Danish-born industrial genius named William Knudsen was already disproving his words. The former president of General Motors, now serving Roosevelt for just $1 a year, was engineering one of the greatest industrial mobilizations in history. Within 4 years, the United States would not only reach that impossible target Göring mocked, it would double it, producing nearly 100,000 aircraft annually, while arming 2 distant fronts across opposite oceans. The declaration that drew such German ridicule had come on May 16, 1940, as German panzers tore through France. Addressing Congress, Roosevelt proclaimed, "I should like to see this nation geared up to the ability to turn out at least 50,000 planes a year." Even America's closest allies reacted with doubt. The previous year, U.S. factories had built barely 3,611 military planes, and the Army Air Corps owned about 1,700 combat aircraft, most already outdated. Yet Roosevelt demanded production increase 14-fold. William Knudsen became the man chosen to make the miracle happen. When advisors asked who could achieve it, Bernard Baruch famously replied, "First, Bill Knudsen. Second, Bill Knudsen. Third, Bill Knudsen." Knudsen had given up his $300,000 salary to serve his adopted country, applying the principles of automobile mass production to aviation. The conversion began at once. By December 1941, American plants were rolling out 2,000 warplanes each month, 20 times the output of just 2 years before. The Ford Motor Company began building a vast bomber plant at Willow Run, Michigan. Boeing expanded its Seattle works. Douglas Aircraft recruited thousands of new laborers. The arsenal of democracy was coming alive. Germany's scorn for American capacity was rooted in racial arrogance and deliberate blindness. General Friedrich von Bolteker, the Wehrmacht's military attaché in Washington from 1933 to 1941, sent detailed and accurate warnings describing the scope of America's mobilization. His December 1940 message cautioned, "American war production will reach unimaginable heights." But Berlin ignored him, dismissing the reports as defeatist nonsense. When Bolteker met Hitler in February 1939 to discuss America's industrial power, the Führer erupted into a tirade about racial decay instead of listening to intelligence. He raved that Americans were half Judaized, half Negro, and therefore unfit for sustained war. That blindness would prove fatal. The prejudice reached from the top of the Reich to its very foundations. Luftwaffe intelligence dismissed early reports of women entering aircraft factories as mere signs of American desperation. German analysts could not imagine that a democratic society might mobilize more efficiently than a totalitarian state. When messages arrived describing factories running around the clock in 3 shifts, they assumed it was an exaggeration. The Nazi worldview was incapable of grasping American reality. Ford's Willow Run plant came to embody that reality. Built on Michigan farmland beginning April 18, 1941, it became the largest factory under one roof, 3.5 million square feet, with an assembly line stretching a full mile. Charles Sorensen, Ford's production chief, boldly promised a bomber a day, then per hour, when other factories barely managed one per day. The initial results were disastrous. The first B-24 Liberator, completed in September 1942, required total reconstruction. Quality control failures reached 50%. By February 1943, Willow Run was producing only 56 bombers a month, far short of the hundreds that had been promised. Critics mockingly nicknamed it "Will It Run?" Yet Ford engineers refused to yield. They broke down the B-24's 488,193 parts into manageable sub-assemblies. They introduced hydraulic riveters, prefabricated wiring harnesses, and continuously moving assembly lines. In 1943 alone, they adapted to 578 design changes while keeping production steady. By September, output rose to 148 bombers per month. By December, to 365. The breakthrough came in April 1944, when Willow Run produced 428 B-24s, one every 63 minutes, 24 hours a day. That single factory was now outproducing the entire German aviation industry. German pilots first realized the scale of American production during the Tunisia campaign. Major Johannes Steinhoff, commander of JG-77, observed in December 1942, "The American pilots are no longer amateurs. Most troubling, there are more of them every day." The realization spread rapidly through 1943. On January 27th, the Americans launched their first raid on Germany itself, 64 bombers attacking Wilhelmshaven. By October, during Black Thursday at Schweinfurt, the U.S. 8th Air Force could lose 60 B-17s and replace them within 2 weeks. The arithmetic had become impossible to ignore. During Big Week, February 20th to 25th, the 8th and 15th Air Forces flew 3,500 bomber sorties targeting German aircraft production. The Luftwaffe lost between 262 and 355 fighters, and more critically, about 100 irreplaceable veteran pilots. General Adolf Galland reported to Göring that Germany was losing 1,200 fighters per month while building only 1,000. America, meanwhile, produced 2,500 fighters monthly and lost just 400. Major Heinz Baer, one of Germany's leading aces with 220 victories, described a January 1944 mission over Brunswick. The bomber stream stretched from horizon to horizon, at least 700 flying fortresses and liberators. We were 8 fighters against hundreds. It was hopeless. By 1944, American aircraft production had reached staggering heights. That year alone, U.S. factories produced 96,270 aircraft, including 16,000 four-engine bombers, 35,743 fighters, and 22,591 multi-engine planes. In a single year, the United States had built more aircraft than Germany managed in the entire war, about 94,677 in total. The difference was not just numerical. Each American bomber carried 13.5 caliber machine guns with thousands of rounds of ammunition, while German fighters increasingly took off with partial loads. American planes featured powered turrets, precision bomb sights, and advanced navigation systems. Many German aircraft flew without functioning radios. Boeing's Plant 2 in Seattle was producing 16 B-17s per day by May 1944. Douglas aircraft, which had employed just 68 people in 1936, grew to 170,000 workers across 9 sites. North American Aviation turned out 500 P-51 Mustangs each month. Lockheed built a P-38 Lightning every 90 minutes, incorporating 2,127 combat-driven modifications. Supporting industries kept pace. General Motors manufactured 57,658 aircraft engines under license. Packard built 55,523 Rolls-Royce Merlins. Alcoa's aluminum production rose 600%. Dow Chemical's magnesium output exploded from 6 million to 333 million pounds annually.
The transformation of the American workforce shattered Nazi assumptions. Women, who made up less than 1% of aircraft workers in 1941, accounted for 65% by 1943, about 310,000 women in the aviation industry. At Douglas Long Beach, 22,382 of 41,632 employees were women. Rose Will Monroe, the real Rosie the Riveter, drove 3,000 rivets per shift at Willow Run with 99.5% accuracy. Female inspectors at Douglas reduced defect rates from 3.2% to 0.3%. Ford redesigned tools for smaller hands, accidentally improving efficiency. Lighter pneumatic tools reduced fatigue. Better workstations lowered injury rates. German intelligence dismissed these women as a temporary measure born of desperation. A captured Luftwaffe report predicted collapsing quality. Instead, precision improved. Women excelled at intricate work, wiring, instrumentation, and inspection. Their contribution embodied democratic strength, not weakness. As American production soared, Germany sank deeper in delusion. Göring authorized the Jaeger program in February 1944, scattering aircraft production across 729 underground facilities worked by slave labor. The Mittelwerk complex alone held 60,000 prisoners, of whom 20,000 died. These factories produced more defects than aircraft. Slaves sabotaged parts, and transport between dispersed sites caused constant delays. Quality control disintegrated. The entire Mittelwerk output of engines each month was less than Ford's single Chicago plant. Meanwhile, American innovation surged ahead. Boeing perfected modular B-29 construction at 4 facilities with fully interchangeable parts. The pressurized B-29, costing $65,000 each, embodied technologies that Germany couldn't replicate even in prototypes. By early 1945, America was turning out 100 B-29s a month. June 6, 1944, revealed the culmination of that production power. On D-Day, the Allies deployed 11,590 aircraft against just 319 German sorties, a 36-to-1 advantage. This was no mere tactical superiority, it was industrial annihilation. Between January and May 1944, Allied bombers dropped 145,000 tons of explosives on German targets, more than the entire Luftwaffe bombing campaign against Britain during the whole war. Transport aircraft carried 3 airborne divisions in a single day, using more planes than Germany's transport fleet possessed at its peak. By December 1944, single raids involved 1,200 bombers escorted by 900 fighters. The P-51 Mustang changed the balance entirely. It had the range to reach Poland, the performance to match any opponent, and it existed in such numbers that losses meant nothing. German pilots grimly nicknamed them Indians because they seemed to appear everywhere at once. As defeat drew near, even the Nazi leadership began to acknowledge the scale of the disaster. In December 1944, Joseph Goebbels wrote in his diary, "Göring's promises of Luftwaffe superiority now seem criminal delusions. We fight the world's greatest industrial power with rhetoric." Field Marshal Rommel warned his staff before D-Day. The Americans can lose 10 tanks for every one we destroy and still overwhelm us. When they land, they will bring such material superiority that no position can hold. Even Hitler confessed to Albert Speer in January 1945, "We should have listened to Boudicca's reports. Their industrial potential was decisive. While we built hundreds, they built tens of thousands." Albert Speer later testified that American bombing reduced German output by 35% in tanks, 31% in aircraft, and 42% in trucks. He stated plainly, "The American attacks, systematically aimed at our industrial heart, caused the breakdown of German armaments." Germany's Me-262 jet fighter, operational by mid-1944, was a true technological marvel. 100 miles per hour faster than any Allied aircraft. Hitler and Göring placed immense hope in this wonder weapon, believing it could restore air superiority despite overwhelming odds. But production realities crushed that dream. Only 1,430 Me-262s were ever built, and no more than 200 were operational at any one time. Their engines required overhauls every 10 hours, and shortages of critical materials forced engineers to use inferior substitutes. Meanwhile, the United States had begun jet development as early as 1942. While the Bell P-59 Aerocomet proved underpowered, Lockheed's P-80 Shooting Star, superior to any German jet, entered production before the war ended. American industrial depth allowed the simultaneous pursuit of multiple technologies, a luxury Germany simply could not afford. That contrast defined the production war. Germany's brilliance in design meant little against America's ability to build thousands of conventional fighters while simultaneously developing the next generation. In total war, quality without quantity was meaningless. Hermann Göring's arrest on May 8, 1945 by elements of the 36th Infantry Division marked his confrontation with reality. Initially defiant at the interrogation center in Augsburg, he insisted that German technology had been superior, defeated only by American numbers. But upon his transfer to Camp Ashcan in Luxembourg, a special facility for high-ranking Nazi prisoners, he faced intensive interrogation. In July 1945, Major Kenneth Hetschler conducted a series of interviews documenting Göring's gradual recognition of America's industrial supremacy. I knew the American potential was great, but the execution exceeded my worst fears. That one factory at Willow Run produced more aircraft than our entire bomber force at its peak. It was incomprehensible. He expressed particular amazement at U.S. logistics. Your ability to supply forces across 2 oceans while maintaining domestic production was beyond our conception. We could barely sustain troops 500 miles from Germany. You supplied entire armies 5,000 miles from home. During his Nuremberg trial, prosecutors confronted Göring with irrefutable evidence of industrial imbalance. Charts showed that by 1944, America was producing more aircraft each month than Germany managed in an entire year. Film footage of Willow Run's mile-long assembly lines played as prosecutors listed the German cities destroyed by bombers built in that single plant. In his March 14, 1946 testimony, Göring admitted his disbelief. I always knew the economic and technical capacity of the United States was vast, especially its Air Force, but I never imagined they could increase aircraft production 100-fold in 4 years. Such growth seemed physically impossible. Prison psychologist Gustav Gilbert later recorded Göring's fixation on production statistics. He constantly recalculated ratios, comparing individual American factories to the entire German industrial base. He seemed particularly haunted by Willow Run, calling it that damned factory that broke our backs. When shown that America had produced 812,675 aircraft engines against Germany's 241,675, Göring stared silently at the numbers. The mathematical truth of defeat could no longer be denied. The scale of that transformation remains astonishing even today. From 3,611 military aircraft in 1940, the United States went on to produce 295,959 planes by war's end, including 97,810 bombers, 99,465 fighters, and 98,684 other aircraft. This represented not just quantity, but systematic superiority in every aspect of production. At the peak of the war, 2 million Americans worked in aircraft manufacturing, a workforce like none the world had seen before. Women, African Americans, Mexican Americans, Native Americans, disabled workers, teenagers, the elderly. This democratic mobilization achieved what totalitarian command never could: voluntary cooperation that outperformed forced labor by every measure. The men and women who entered factories in 1941 knowing nothing about aircraft emerged in 1945 as the most skilled aviation workforce on Earth.
They didn't just build planes, they reinvented manufacturing itself. Statistical quality control, first developed for bomber production, became a global industrial standard. Automation principles pioneered at Willow Run transformed manufacturing across every field.
The engineers who designed bomber assembly lines would later design the Saturn V rocket. The women who riveted B-24s would raise children who walked on the moon. The production miracle didn't end with victory. It launched the American century. The financial scoil defied all economic orthodoxy. Aircraft production consumed $45 billion in 1940s dollars, the equivalent of nearly $800 billion today. The B-29 program alone cost more than the entire Manhattan Project. Yet instead of bankrupting America, war production created unparalleled prosperity. Unemployment, which had crippled the nation during the Depression, vanished completely. Personal income doubled between 1940 and 1945. Workers themselves financed much of the expansion. Willow Run employees alone purchased $45 million in war bonds, funding their own factories' operations. Germany, by contrast, devoted 40% of its total industrial capacity to aircraft by 1944, yet still produced less than half the American output. Slave labor, upon which the Reich increasingly depended, proved catastrophically counterproductive. Sabotage became endemic. Quality collapsed. Productivity per German worker declined after 1943, even as American productivity soared 300%. The industrial infrastructure built for war became the foundation of post-war prosperity. Aluminum smelters that once supplied bombers produced materials for the suburban housing boom. Chemical plants that refined aviation fuel gave birth to the modern plastics industry. Machine tool factories that built the engines of war now tooled up the engines of peace. The very system that armed the Allies now powered America's global dominance. Beyond sheer output lay organizational genius. The War Production Board coordinated 184,000 companies with astonishing precision. IBM punch card machines tracked millions of components across thousands of suppliers. At MIT's Radiation Laboratory, 4,000 scientists developed the radar and navigation systems that gave American bombers all-weather capability. When combat exposed the B-17's vulnerability to frontal attacks, Boeing added chin turrets within 60 days. When Pacific operations required a longer range, Consolidated modified the B-24 mid-production without halting output. German changes took months, even years. American improvements took weeks. This adaptability proved as decisive as production itself. American aircraft evolved continuously based on global combat experience. Information flowed from Pacific airfields to Atlantic production lines in days. German aircraft built in isolated underground factories by slave labor remained static. American designs improved weekly. The feedback loop between combat and production achieved a level of efficiency unseen in history. Pilots' observations reached engineers instantly. Engineers' solutions reached assembly lines almost as fast. Workers' suggestions reached designers directly. This democratic exchange of information outperformed Germany's rigid hierarchy. It was the victory of open collaboration over command. On October 15, 1946, just hours before his scheduled execution, Hermann Göring wrote his final letter. In it, he made his most complete admission of the production war's meaning. The Americans won through industrial power, not military prowess. We were not defeated by better soldiers, but by better factories. The nation we dismissed as capable only of building consumer goods buried the Wehrmacht in aluminum and steel. His last words to psychologist G.M. Gilbert were even more revealing. We declared war on an industrial giant while it slept. When it awoke, we were doomed. They didn't just outproduce us, they revolutionized production itself. Every part of their system was superior. That night, Göring committed suicide, but his final confession remains history's verdict on the production war.
The Reichsmarshal, who had once mocked America's factories, died knowing a single U.S. plant had built more bombers than his entire Luftwaffe. Military historians now consider America's industrial triumph the decisive factor in Allied victory. Without it, D-Day would have been impossible. The bombing campaign is unsustainable. The Pacific War was unwinnable. As historian Richard Overy wrote, the outcome was determined not by fighting spirit or tactical brilliance, but by the weight of material. The Allies didn't just win, they buried their enemies beneath an avalanche of production. By 1944, the United States alone was building more military aircraft than every other nation on Earth combined, Axis and Allied. This wasn't mere superiority, it was total industrial annihilation. Germany didn't just lose the war, it was obliterated by arithmetic. Yet the meaning of this miracle transcended the battlefield. It proved democracy's superiority over dictatorship, freedom's advantage over tyranny, voluntary cooperation's strength over coerced obedience. The workers who achieved this transformation weren't slaves or conscripts. They were free citizens united in common purpose. Hermann Göring's arrogance stands as history's most catastrophic miscalculation. His contempt for democratic industry cost Germany the war and millions of lives. His blindness to America's true power sealed the Reich's fate before the first bomber ever reached German skies. The transformation from 3,000 to 100,000 aircraft a year proved that free societies, when threatened, can achieve the impossible. American workers didn't just meet Roosevelt's impossible goal, they doubled it. They didn't just match German production, they outproduced it fivefold while fighting a two-ocean war. Modern leaders would do well to remember Göring's mistake. Underestimating free nations because they prefer peace to conquest is the oldest and deadliest error in history. In 1940, America seemed unready for war. By 1944, it had become an unstoppable industrial colossus. The arsenal of democracy proved that production lines could be as decisive as front lines, that factory workers could be as vital as soldiers, that industrial mobilization could win wars as surely as armies. Göring learned that truth too late, at the cost of his nation's destruction. From his scornful dismissal of Roosevelt's 1940 proclamation to his suicide at Nuremberg in 1946, Göring's story mirrors the fall of Nazi Germany itself, a regime that mistook ideology for strength, that belief in racial mythology could overpower mathematics, that thought tyranny could outbuild freedom. The Reichsmarshal, who once laughed at America's aircraft dreams, died knowing that U.S. factories had built more planes in a single year than Germany managed in the entire war. His mockery of democratic industry became history's most expensive joke, paid for in total defeat. America built 295,959 military aircraft. Germany built 94,677. But the real victory wasn't in numbers. It was in the method. Free workers outproduced slaves. Democratic cooperation outperformed totalitarian command. A nation of immigrants and dreamers united to achieve the impossible. The B-24 bombers rolling off Willow Run every 63 minutes weren't just machines. They were democracy's answer to tyranny. Each rivet was driven by a woman who had been a housewife months earlier. Each engine was assembled by a teenager who left school to serve. Each wing was crafted by workers who had once fled poverty and prejudice. Together, they proved that free people, when united in purpose, can bury tyranny beneath an avalanche of production. Hermann Göring laughed at the idea of America building 50,000 planes a year. America responded by building twice that number, and in doing so, changed the course of human history. His laughter became the echo of ruin, the sound of catastrophic miscalculation, the fatal underestimation of democracy's arsenal by a man who understood neither democracy nor production. In the end, both buried him and everything he stood for beneath 300,000 aircraft that turned his arrogance into history's most complete defeat.